Welcome to a new wave of entrepreneurship. I'm Scott Sturt, founder and CEO of Venture for Canada, and your host. The focus of this podcast is to hear from changemakers and young Canadian entrepreneurs to learn how they develop their entrepreneurial mindset and skills. In season 1, we'll be chatting with young Canadians about their entrepreneurial journey as Venture for Canada Fellow Alumni. I'm excited to dive into these conversations about how to foster your entrepreneurial mindset and drive. Welcome. We're super excited to have Mark Dhillon on a new wave of entrepreneurship. Mark is a 2016 Venture for Canada fellow. Hard to believe that Mark and I would have first met over 5 years ago. Since he joined Venture for Canada, he has had a variety of different roles, including as the Director of Portfolio Operations at Canopy Rivers, a leading Canadian venture capital firm with investments around the world, and the Director of Strategy and Operations at FarmLead, which is a venture-backed startup based out of Ottawa. Mark also has a master's degree in business and in engineering. He has done a wide range of different entrepreneurial ventures throughout his life, and he's currently working on a new entrepreneurial venture right now. Mark has always impressed me as one of the most kind of entrepreneurial Venture for Canada fellows, and also somebody who is super thoughtful and just like a pleasure to be around. I'm really excited to have you on the show today. Thanks for coming today, Mark.
Thanks for the lovely intro, Scott.
So first off, for kind of our listeners, can you describe a little bit about yourself, kind of beyond the intro, and then maybe give a little bit of context in terms of what you're currently working on?
Sure. Quick background, grew up in Ottawa, grew up in a family of engineers, all really smart, all really nerdy. So when kids went to camp and were swimming and making s'mores by the fire, I was sent to robotics and math camp. So that was very interesting. Around the age of 13, I found skateboarding. So that pretty much like formed who I am. Just loved every ounce of it. So when I went to do my undergrad, I tried to figure out exactly what I wanted to kind of like, study, but also kind of like also merge in with skateboarding. And I thought I'd design skate parks for a living. So I did my undergrad in civil engineering, realized I really didn't like it, did my master's in, structural engineering to see if I could specialize a little more to do like kind of bridge design. And at the end of it, I did my MBA. And that's when I kind of fell into the whole tech startup scene, the entrepreneurial scene, started a sunglass and apparel brand with my friends. And then met you through the Venture for Canada Fellowship. So from there, like you said before, kind of worked for an incubator, and one of the companies in the incubator raised a Series A. So I joined them, helped them scale the company. Then most recently was at a venture capital firm, and now I'm starting a new company with my friend Zach Smith. So he's one of the founding engineers at Clearbank, also ex data science there. And essentially, it's like I don't want to give too much away of it because we're still kind of in like the early stages of it, and but essentially, it's like we're reinventing the operational process to launch a startup. So you can plan, validate, and build using one turnkey product. And I'll leave a little bit at that, but I'll be announcing probably a couple more things soon in the next upcoming months after the On Deck program finishes up. So that's about it.
Excited to follow what you're doing, and given your operational expertise, I see a ton of alignment between what your new business venture is and kind of your background and experience. Kind of going chronologically in terms of kind of your skateboarding experience, and I'm always interested. By the way, I tried skateboarding probably around in the same age, but my lack of coordination skills really resulted in me just kind of going around a cul-de-sac. So I still get kind of anxiety thinking of my own self. I think probably the extent to my skateboarding was playing with tech decks for.
Oh, that was. Same with me in class. I would be, my fingers would be moving the entire time. I wouldn't be really taking notes. I'd just be trying to do kickflips on the actual desk. But yeah, everyone was obsessed with tech decks back then.
Are tech decks still a thing?
I don't know. Like, probably. I think so. I guess I'm too old. I've grown out of it, but I'm assuming so. They're probably sure there's kids like playing around with it at home.
Yeah, that's what I wonder. I wonder if the kids of today, because certainly in the '90s, it was like it was a big deal. But anyway, on the topic of kind of skateboarding, what do you think attracted you to skateboarding? And I know you still enjoy kind of skateboarding as like a pastime. What are some lessons that you learned from your experience skateboarding?
Yeah, like, what attracted me was just like I saw my friend do an ollie, and I'm like, I don't get it. Like, how does like that board stick to your feet? and it's like it didn't make sense to me. So I was like, I got to try. I got to figure out how to do it. And then it became just an obsession. I think what kept me, going over like the past 18 years being a skater has been just all the people. I think it's like definitely like the rush of like, basically landing a trick for the first time or doing something you didn't think it was possible. That's definitely like a drug, but the thing that keeps me there is the community. And it's like the people who are just so creative and just very rebellious and, big thinkers. And at the same time, just like they don't judge your background, they accept everyone. And I think that's been something that has always drawn me back. It's just that community, and I think for the rest of my life, I'll be a skater no matter what. Even if I skate once a month or once a year, it's like I will always be a skater deep down.
I think that point of community is super important, and I know one of the things that you've been very intentional in your career is that searching and seeking communities to kind of be a part of. So it makes sense even from as a kid, kind of finding that community in skateboarding, and then as an adult finding it in new ways. So you recently started participating in the On Deck Fellowship on the topic of community.
Yeah.
Can you tell our listeners what is the On Deck Fellowship, and what's your experience been like so far?
Essentially, what the program is basically like Y Combinator, but for like individuals who don't have ideas yet or are very early stage in like their actual like company. So it's basically like the way people are kind of like explain it. It's like Y Combinator years 1 to 4, and it's from tech talent from all across the world, from people in San Francisco to people in Mumbai to people in Copenhagen, and it launched about 18 months ago, and since then about 330 companies have been formed, and over $250 million of venture capital has been raised from some of the top investors in the world, like Sequoia, Greylock, Founders Fund. So it's basically like a human accelerator, but essentially like they're just putting really smart people together, and they're like, you can figure it out. You figure out what the idea is, and then from there, like these amazing things have been happening over almost the past year and a half. So that's basically the high level of what it is.
One thing in our virtual world of pandemic, where everything isn't taking place in person, I know a challenge that a lot of organizations have had, including Venture for Canada, is how to foster that a sense of community in a completely virtual space. So, based on your experience in On Deck and what I've seen on Twitter from the very active On Deck community, it seems like they do a great job of fostering that sense of community via Slack and other online tools. A few questions is, first off, is kind of how do you think they foster that community effectively via virtual means? And then secondly, what advice do you have for somebody who's just joining kind of On Deck potentially in the future on how to best engage in the community?
I think it's like, I'm very early on, so I'm still learning quite a bit of it. I think what they do first off is they let in people who are very community focused. I think you can be one of the top tech talents in the world, but if you're not willing to give back, you're probably not a good fit for On Deck. And that's what really kind of spins like the flywheel. I think secondly, what they've done is this amazing onboarding program. So they really kind of like make you introduce yourself to the entire kind of community. They set you up with all these kind of like, different channels. There's networking events, ice breaking events. So they really want you to connect with each other. And that's like the secret sauce of, I think, On Deck, what it is. It's serendipitous moments and serendipitous connections that create these new kind of ventures, these new ideas. I think going into it, just go in trying to meet as many people that kind of pique your curiosity. So really kind of when you go in there, like put out the ask for like, I'm looking to meet people who are designers because I'm passionate about design and I really don't have like any idea what I'm doing. Or I really want to kind of meet venture capitalists because I want to learn how to kind of fundraise, and just kind of put out these asks and people will actually come to you. And at the same time, put yourself out there too. If you find someone's background's very curious, reach out to them for like a 15-20 minute coffee and just like start talking to everyone. And then from there, this amazing kind of like, just like kind of like energy will flow throughout the program. And I think that's how these companies form, because people find kind of like passions that they're aligned on, and they start companies based on that.
One thing I've always observed about you, Mark, and I think you're super talented at it, is relationship building, and I think maintaining relationships with people kind of over time. A challenge a lot of people have, particularly when they're starting that career, is chat, in essence, like how to have conversations with strangers and how to build and grow and develop their professional network. So if you were to give advice to a recent grad or someone kind of starting their career who is interested in having lots of these kind of coffee chats, but for them to be like meaningful and mutually beneficial, what advice would you give that person?
I think it's more kind of like, I've seen like so many people try to network and like they just feel very uncomfortable and it doesn't make sense. And sometimes you're very introverted. Like I was very introverted, I think initially. But what the thing I figured out that made the most sense to me, it's like I just wanted to connect with people when like take away business, take away like credentials. I just want to have like a beer with you or a coffee with you, and I want to get to know you. I want to be friends with you. So that's how I've kind of built my entire community around me. It's like it's not based on like, oh, you were like ex McKinsey or you went to Harvard, and like I want to like use you to kind of like move up to this like different level. It's just like I just generally like you. So like take this all away. It's like we can just be friends, and like that's been like my compass the entire time. And fortunately, I've just been able to meet a lot of great people through that. And that's it. That's my 2 cents. Just try to like network with people you like.
I agreed. In a separate podcast episode, one of our guests talked about embracing the journey over the destination, and I think that that applies to networking. If somebody is just trying to meet people for their own self benefit or the prestige of that person, it doesn't usually end up going anywhere.
There's like a quick split. It's builders versus climbers. You want to be a builder, don't be a climber.
Agreed. Yeah, I think that and I think in startup ecosystems, there's, yeah, there can be a lot of climbers sometimes, and it is very important to be more of a builder. And I think also it's important in approaching relationships, to think about what value you can provide the other person.
Yeah, yeah, and being genuine and transparent. That's it. Very simple.
100%. So, kind of going back in time as well, you were or kind of the co-founder of SH Shades, which is a sunglass and apparel company, and it was kind of one of your first entrepreneurial experiments. I'm kind of fascinated in kind of people's first kind of like entrepreneurial thing they do, because I think that there's so many lessons and that can actually have a huge impact on somebody's like career trajectory. These kind of like experiments and first entrepreneurial sort of journeys. Can you describe kind of what is SH Shades and what did you learn from the experience?
Yeah, so there was about five of us in Thailand, and we were buying all the fake Ray-Bans there, and we'd always bring them home and give it to our friends, our skater friends, because they couldn't afford like $200 pairs of shades, and we're like, they look just as good. At the same time, if you lose them, who cares? So we brought them back, and all our friends would like pay us $5 for them. We're like, why don't we just start a skateboard company? It's just like branded ourselves. We have all our friends are working at skate shops. We've always wanted to do it, and we just have to figure out how to like do the market research, create the brand, build the supply chain, get the product in, and then see if it sells. And that's what we did. Like we basically like scoured Alibaba for like 3 or 4 months, got products in, found out some of them were crap, some of them were great. And eventually we found one manufacturer that was like awesome. And then we just kind of like gave it to all our friends that are like awesome skaters and gave it to like the skate shops around. And for some reason it worked. So for like 5 years, like I learned how to like, the fundamentals of business, running a business, and also like how to manage a P&L. And the best thing is I got to do it with my best friends. And the biggest thing it taught me was like, don't do it for like the accolades or the money. Just do it because you want to. Do it for the adventure. Do it because you're passionate about it. And to this day, it's the best lesson I've learned so far in being in big business since I graduated.
I agree. I think it's interesting on the concept of passion and kind of career, because there's a lot of debate right around the follow your passion and things. I think it's, if there's 2 points, and I'm interested in your feedback. I think the first is that it's okay for somebody not to have know their passion yet, and to not be obsessed about finding it. That sometimes somebody finds their passion over time. The second point is to say that it is important to have a passion in life, to eventually kind of like find it. It's interesting. Angela Duckworth in the book Grit, which is debated a lot, but she talks about how people who have a deep sense of purpose, and that they have a top level goal, so like a fundamental goal in life that all other goals kind of like link to, that those people, and that every single day they are focused on that goal, and how they allocate their time, their energy, kind of everything. Those are some of the people who have the most grit, the most determination, the most kind of like perseverance. So yeah, I'd love to kind of, I guess a few is, what are your thoughts kind of on that topic, and then second off, on more personally, like what do you view as your own like top level goal for life that other kind of goals to sort of tie into?
Yeah, so I think for me, I went from like civil skateboarding, wanting to be a professional skateboarder, to wanting to be a civil engineer designing skate parks, to wanting to be a tech entrepreneur, and like, yeah, wanting to be a venture capitalist. So like it all stumbled around, but I think the biggest thing is like, don't be too hard on yourself. These things like will change, and just go where it feels great and follow great people. and the rest of it will kind of fall into place, and just kind of chase like diverse kind of experiences. Because at the end of the day, when you die, it's like, I think the biggest thing you're going to look back on is like, wow, I had so many great different adventures. And sometimes people put so much effort, I mean, into like focusing on one thing, becoming really good at it. And sometimes they don't really care about it after a while. Like, it's okay to change. Change is good. And I think on the other part is like, sorry, what was the other question? This the follow on one? I was just,
What do you view as your own kind of top level
yeah,
goal?
for me, it's getting back to, so I did my MBA with, I traveled throughout Asia for like 4 months and I saw the poverty there and it hit me like a brick. And for me, it was like, I did my MBA specializing in international development. And I remember I was like going to go get a job after, and my professor's like, don't go international development right now. It's like, go do something else where you can learn all the fundamental skills that you need to thrive in this industry. So go into tech, go into business, learn the fundamentals, build the network, and then eventually you can go back with this amazing set of experience and skill sets and like people around you that you can make an actual difference. So for me, it's going back to international development, and I can see that happening in my 40s. I don't think I'll be in tech that long. There might be some cross pollination between the both, but for me, it's like the high level goals go back to international development and go into the areas of the world where they need the most help. And I think right now with COVID kind of like, ravaging the rest of the world, it's kind of like a perfect opportunity to kind of like, kind of dive a little bit kind of inside. But yeah, that's my goal, is to go back to international development eventually and just help people in, less impoverished areas.
And I think it's a great point on the concept of purpose, because I think when sometimes people think about what is their purpose in life, that they'll define it in a very prescriptive, very specific sense. So that, like, in the sense that I want to build this X company, and that is the purpose, and that's their whole purpose for life. And to your point, life changes, right? Like it's not. But if I think that it can be really strategic to have that broad, like there was a one line you said there that really stuck out to me, which was, where you said you want to have these diverse life experiences, you want to develop these different skill sets. So in essence, you can create more impact and kind of go to international development. That's a sufficiently broad kind of, it's still a North Star, it's still a focus, but sufficiently broad that recognizes that life changes, interests change. And I think it's a great kind of paradigm of how people can think about it. Kind of one relating to this topic of kind of operational experience is you're a steering committee member of Operators Guild, and one thing that's come up is you have you're like a born operator. You love building things, from SH Shades to the various different kind of startups to what you're doing currently right now. What, I guess, can you describe what is Operators Guild, and yeah, what are some of the things that you've learned from being a part of the community?
Yeah, so the tagline, it's a community home to the world's top operators, so finance and operations executives. So on a high level, it's a peer group where we support each other on, problems that we're solving, like how to IPO a company or how to scale a Series A co. Share lessons learned, war stories, find new jobs, but I think most importantly, figure out how to give back to your community. It's invite only, so it keeps the bar very high in terms of like, the quality of members. And there's approximately 600 or 700 members now across North America, and it's becoming more international. So it was started about 8 years ago by Casey Wu and Jamie Stiglars in Silicon Valley, when they realized there was no community for operators, because operators are very diverse in talent, where there are communities for sales and marketing, which is a little more linear. So that was started there, and I've been super fortunate to be a part of it so far, and it's come like very handy at times when I really needed it. I remember when COVID hit and I had to take care of like 18 different portfolio companies and kind of advise them on contingency planning. I was able to speak to the co-founder of Netflix, Jim Cook, and he kind of shared lessons learned in the 2008 crash as a CFO, and like, this is what I did, this is how I survived, and that really helped me kind of like navigate the murky waters that were kind of ahead for our portfolio and also our company. And also they're doing other great things. There's something they just launched recently called Fog Advisory. So fogadvisory.com, and it allows startups to garner feedback on their product from potential users and buyers. Also get strategic operational advisory from like 50 world-class executives. And I'm really fortunate to be a part of that. And, you can talk to executives at, Facebook, at Intuit, at Waymo, at Credit Karma, at DoorDash. So essentially it's like a bunch of operators trying to like figure out how to make each other better and also give back to the community and different companies around the world.
Yeah, I think communities can be so important. I recently read this phrase that the most important thing in life is not learning from experience, but it's learning from other people's experience.
Yeah.
And, And very, very true, especially if you can learn from people who've like done it, seen it, experienced it. It can be super invaluable. Kind of on that point, one thing that it often I hear in Canada is a lack of people who are in essence have like a high growth skill set. So there's a lot of people who might work in a Canadian Tire, like an executive level or a CIBC, and they've been they're an executive in a company that can maybe grow 5, 7, 8% per year. But that there's a shortage of executives who can lead company. Let's say it's at $100 million revenue, and they want to be $1 billion company, and they're growing at 40% per year. What do you think are some of the unique skill sets required in an executive in that high growth, and in particular, I mean, an executive, an operations executive, in a high growth setting versus a low growth setting?
Yeah, like I've been fortunate enough to be like surrounded by like individuals who've IPO'd companies and who've worked in like the high growth setting. And I think it comes down to, again, one fundamental thing for every company is attracting and hiring really great people. That never stops ever. So I think that, and also creating a place that's safe for others to learn, grow and be vulnerable. So a culture. I think those are the two fundamentals of every company. But I think the really true differentiator at the top is strategic planning. And I think that's where a lot of companies are very poor at. Setting the 5 year horizon. How do you reverse engineer what the transformative event is going to be to there and like where you are currently? How do you do the resourcing for that? How do you make sure the girls are actually attainable and people align on them and they're focused on them? I think strategic planning and being really good at it and having a team to kind of focus on that. From what I've seen, is like the biggest differentiator between kind of like medium growth companies to high growth.
How do you recommend high growth companies structure a strategy, or even if maybe they shouldn't even have a strategy team, but how do you create the structures to ensure that strategic planning process exists?
I think it's like there should be a cadence and process to it. Like I'm an operator and like that's like the way I think. So I think, you should really be assessing what you're currently doing right now and, figuring out what you shouldn't be doing or what you should be doing. But I think it's more kind of like, get the CEO and, a couple of different people to set a high level goal for the year. And it should be audacious. It should be big, hairy, audacious, it should be HAG. And from there, it's like, okay, figure out from there, what are the operational things that we can achieve across the actual company and really get the votes of the people that are leading those different charges from marketing to product. And then from there, it's like, is this viable? If this is viable, cool. Let's put it together an operational plan and a timeline to see what this looks like. And then from there, it's like, understand the resources. Okay, these are the people that we have to hire. And if we hire these people, these are the goals we can hit, and then create a timeline from there and then execute and align with that. So your entire company understands the mission to metrics kind of story. And having that like kind of like synergy across the company is what's very important. So creating a process, make sure everyone's aligned, everyone's communicating, make sure communicating across the company from like the executives all the way down to the entry level employees. So that's my 2 cents on a very high level.
I agree. The communications piece is so important, I think, in leadership and to create people to make sure people are aligned. Venture for Canada is only around 20 staff, and I've experienced challenges even in an organization of this size of how do you keep that alignment and have everybody aligned on strategy and soliciting kind of feedback. I can only imagine the challenges when you're 1,000 person company or 2,000.
It's kind of crazy. Like the one thing I'll just say, it's like Elon Musk is like an expert at this. So he really kind of like the mission to metrics story. He's like, you can go ask anyone at Tesla and they'll tell you like, these are the metrics that I'm a part of growing. And this is how it aligns back to the mission of our company and our goal this year. And if you can do that, you have a winning strategy.
Do you recommend the using like an objectives and key results framework for companies?
It really, I would say yes for the most part, but it really depends on the company and how they've kind of founded their goal setting structure. So everyone has a different process to it. I think OKRs kind of work the best from what I've seen so far, but I've also seen some really big companies in the Valley that like don't use OKRs. They just use like, here are the goals, here are the KPIs, figure it out. And they just let their team kind of go at it because their team is so structured, they'll figure it out.
Have you used the Salesforce V2MOM, the vision, was it vision values mission method? I forget the full acronym, but that method.
I've never used it. I've read about it, but I've never actually used it. But I know some companies have used it and they're very successful. But it really depends on the people you have in the company and the culture around it. But there's so many different practices. It's just like really fits your like kind of like subjective environment and just go with it.
Yeah, I think that that sense of clarity of each employee, like the extent to which employees feel that they are clear on what their goals and what their purpose is it's so important for employee satisfaction, but also just for the company in general.
Very important. It's the number one thing.
What do you think? So to the point of high growth leaders and the kind of conversation, you have lots of experience in Canada with the kind of the Canadian tech ecosystem. Do you think that that there is a shortage of people who have the kind of high growth operational kind of experience needed to scale Canadian companies?
I think so, but I think it's getting better. I think that initially a lot of people left to go to the bigger hubs to really learn what like the best practices were, but I think people are coming back now, and I think a lot of people too, because like what's happening now, everyone's at home and you can basically live in Silicon Valley but live in Toronto. And you know what I mean is like your entire communities in Silicon Valley, all your morning coffees are like over Zoom, but you can still learn from them. But it's getting better in Canada. I don't think it's at the same level as San Francisco, but we're different. Like we can't compare ourselves to like those different hubs, but it's starting to improve because a lot of people are starting to stick to like their guns and starting to live like in the cities that they love, and they're starting to build with their friends and stopping. There's not caring so much anymore to be in the middle of it. So yeah, it's coming. It's coming along from what I'm seeing.
Agreed. I think there's more opportunities for people to build companies from wherever. And I mean,
Yeah,
even I think there has been for a long. You look at Verafin, which sold in St. John's, Newfoundland, for $2.5 billion to Nasdaq late last year, and Skip the Dishes in Winnipeg that sold
yeah,
to with Just Eats, or Vendasta in Saskatoon. People can build really successful companies from small places and places that aren't necessarily known as tech hubs.
absolutely.
Um, which is super kind of exciting. And I think it's an interesting, to your point too, is it's not about replicating Silicon Valley. Nobody can replicate Silicon Valley. And there's a lot of things about Silicon Valley that aren't worth replicating.
You don't want to. Like I think, I've been down there so much and it's like there's so many bad things about it. I don't want Toronto to be Silicon Valley. Toronto is amazing. It's just like everyone's friendlier here. They're less stressed out. They're like less like it's just like you should be your own version of ourselves. And I think it's like take the good lessons from Silicon Valley and bring them here, but leave all the bad stuff there. And that's about it.
On the topic of kind of bad, things broken in tech, there's a lot of criticism increasingly of venture capital and whether venture capital is broken, whether there's sort of structural issues. In short, do you think venture capital is broken as a system? And what do you think are some of the ways venture capitalists can improve their ways of working?
I I think amongst the top tier venture capital firms, I think things are still working quite fine. I think the way they invest, they're trying to rethink things. Like you can look at social capital and Chamath and how he's kind of seeing investing in companies. He's just going after SPACs now. But I think it needs reinvention for sure. And I think the way it could really fix itself is, what I've saw a lot is that a lot of investors, when you're investing in companies, how can you invest in a company without understanding how a company runs, how getting your hands dirty? It's like you can say you're a specialist in in hockey, but I've never stepped foot in a rink. So I think what it is a lot of venture capital has been basically kind of driven by like ex investment bankers, hedge funds, ex hedge fund employees, consultants. But I think really where you see some of the best venture capital firms in the world, the one thing they have across the board is have operational experience. So really getting like ex entrepreneurs sitting in the seat where like I understand the things that you're going through, so you can be more helpful to companies, but they also then can make better bets. And I think that's really what it is, and it's happening. I still think there's going to be tier two and tier three and tier four venture capital funds that don't have that, but I think really amongst the top, they're reinventing themselves because they realize they can't stay the same. They stay static. They're going to get wiped out.
Yeah, I agreed, and it seems like many of the leading venture capital firms are in the United States, in particular, are focused increasingly on value-added services beyond investment. In the context of Venture for Canada's work, there are venture cap Sequoia and other venture capital firms in the U.S. actually have programs that are kind of similar to Venture for Canada that they run for their portfolio companies. And when I've talked, to different venture capitalists sometimes in Canada, they've been, oh, that's not we don't need to do that. That's not our focus in things. But then if Sequoia, you know, one of the most prestigious firms in the world, is like they're willing to put money in and basically help their companies recruit interns and recent grad hires, it seems like a whole difference in mindset sometimes.
If you look at Snowflake was like basically a JV between founders and venture capitalists, and they created one of the most like, one of the biggest IPOs we've seen in years. I think one of the big things we'll start seeing is one, it's going to be kind of taking on different forms. Like, social capital is not a venture capital firm anymore. It's a different kind of like financial instrument. But the second thing is a venture studio. I think venture studios are going to start sitting inside venture capital firms where they're not only going to start creating tools to help their portfolio become more efficient, but at the same time start creating ideas where they can find operators to jump into them. So I think that's the future.
I agree. It's interesting. Are you familiar with the entrepreneur first model?
No.
They're a British company, but they actually opened in Toronto as well, and they now they've raised hundreds of millions of dollars. But basically, they help kind of like match its founders together. It's like I'd say a later stage on deck. Well, actually not a later stage, but different. So basically, they'll pay somebody a salary for 3 months. They'll bring people together to kind of like co-create like businesses. It's very selective, like kind of similar to Venture for Canada. And they intentionally, where different than Venture for Canada, they intentionally get like technical and non-technical people. So it's people with very deep expertise, and then they'll invest in them actually launching companies. So some of these people have gone on to raise like $50 million from meeting a co-founder through the Entrepreneur First kind of program. It's an intriguing model.
There's so many permutations out there, and I'm really interested to see what's going to be the kind of like the more kind of like linear path for most venture capital firms, but we'll see. It may just be very diverse from now on out, and everyone's going to have their own kind of unique strategy, and that's going to be awesome because it's going to create some really awesome companies and give a lot of different people opportunities to jump in the driver's seat of companies that they never had the opportunity beforehand.
To your point about operators as VCs, I think that's a really important point. One thing I at different points have been really confused sometimes in Canada is that some of the most prominent venture capitalists will be people who you look at their background and it's like, oh, partner at accounting firm, partner, I worked at big bank for like 25 years, and it's hard to have that sense of empathy if you've never been in the trenches.
Yeah, and I've worked with a lot of venture capitalists, have friends who work at different VC firms. Like the ones who get it best are the ones who've been there. That's it. It's like in some of these venture capitalists are like they make bets. They're gambling, right? It's like intelligent gambling. That's what it is. And they don't have to be good at their job. They just have to make one good bet. If they make one good bet and they return their entire find, or they make themselves look really good, it's like they look like a genius. But like that's not like, it's like the ones that hit home runs over and over and over again. And you look at A16Z, like Andreessen, and you look at Sequoia's, like they're hitting home runs over and over again. And the proven model is because they have operators sitting there next to the individuals who are also from investment banking. Like, don't get me wrong, like you need people who come from the financial industry to understand how these things are mechanics work, but you need a cross-pollination of the both. And I think if you have one linear kind of culture and talent within a venture capital firm, it's not going to do well.
Yeah, I think that's a good point. It's you want a mixture of operators and the people who worked in private equity and venture capital and investment banking. Yeah, it's an interesting kind of way to think about it. So one kind of shifting gears a little bit is that if you were you have this kind of unique experience where you have the kind of both sides of the table, which, by the way, there's a great blog for our listeners by Mark Suster called Both Sides of the Table, which on this topic, or on the topic of venture capital, which is kind of interesting. How as a founder, where you're launching a new venture now, and you've worked in venture capital in the past, how has your VC experience helped you in your current entrepreneurial experience?
I think there's the tactical side. So like structuring deals, understanding like the little boo-boos you can see in the term sheet, and making sure that you have a deal that's fair on both sides. You're not getting taken advantage of. I think Venture Deals is a book. If you want to kind of learn more about that, is a great read. I think the other thing is understanding the stresses that venture capitalists go through and understanding what they have to deal with on a daily basis. They have to go to their LPs and raise more money. They have to hit home runs. They have to analysts are basically like SDRs. They have to go out there and sell companies to come in and build a pipeline and then convert that pipeline over. So I think understanding the psychology of an investor has been really kind of like helpful for me because I can speak to them on a different level. Where I think a lot of startups are just like, I'm the most important thing in the world. My company's the best thing ever. And it's like, you have to find common ground. So I think really what I can do now is like I can find common ground between the entrepreneur and in the venture capitalist and investor very quickly, and that's been my advantage so far. I think over the past like 6 months of working on different companies, talking to investors, it's building that network. It's been finding that common ground.
One person once gave me once kind of shared advice where they said, follow the money in venture capital. So look at who are the LPs of the venture capital fund, and it that determines what that venture capital fund's like priorities are. And that one of the most astute questions that an entrepreneur can ask a venture capital fund is kind of, what is the time horizon of their LPs? And that is a question, I guess, not sometimes not asked as much as it should. But are there any other questions you recommend that people like? Let's say if the VC is on board, they basically want to invest money in it, and entrepreneurs just deciding whether it makes sense. What are the questions what are some of the due diligence questions an entrepreneur should ask a VC to determine if that VC is a good fit?
First of all, be careful of brain drain. A lot of like VCs are just like really vetting you just to learn about like the industry. Understand what's in their portfolio. If there's something that's kind of like kind of like competitive to what you're doing, they may be just trying to take something from you. So make sure like there's no like kind of like big kind of like red flags in their portfolio of like they may be stealing information. I think the other thing is like looking at the dry powder in the fund, how much like money they have left to spend, and if they've raised a new fund. Because if they don't have much capital left in the fund, and they haven't announced a new fund, you need to know if there's capital coming in the door, because maybe all those reserves are kind of pro rata rights to their previous investments. And I think at the same time too, it's like understanding who you're talking to. If you're talking to an analyst or you're talking to a principal, and understanding exactly like what they want to achieve in their career. If like they've hit home runs, if you go on their website, you can see who they invested in. They're probably in a really good like limelight in like the actual firm, and everyone's kind of like job is to get to a partner level because you want part of that carry. So I think understanding the psychology, understanding the portfolio, understanding the capital in that portfolio and in that fund, where they are in that fundraise with LPs, and understanding exactly like the person you're talking to, what they're trying to achieve within that firm and in their career. And I think those are the 3 points I would kind of go around. I can go much deeper, but I think those are the three high level things I would kind of just focus on.
Yeah, it's great advice, and your recommendation of venture deals is awesome. Brad Feld is probably one of my favorite writers, just in general. He's such a
It's
fantastic
really good.
guy.
Yeah.
There's a great for our listeners, if you're interested in another podcast, there's a great interview. It's like Tim Ferriss. I have always enjoyed some of his interviews, but a lot of times they're only an hour and a half. The Brad Feld one is like 3 hours long. That guy gives very voluminous answers, but it's just completely brilliant. And he also has a great book called The Startup Community Way, which is really interesting about kind of startup communities as well. On the topic of books, what are a few books that you recommend our listeners check out, and why?
Recently, Range, generalist versus specialist debate. Bill Gates, like I have one of his newsletters and he recommended it. And like, I'm a generalist. So I always have a bias to be like, I want to see the confirmation bias on one side, but the book is really good explaining both sides and kind of just showing different paths. So I think that's one just top of mind. Trillion Dollar Coach is amazing. Bill Campbell, just kind of explains kind of like, his leadership style and his ability to coach some of the top executives out of the world, and coming from football, where the fundamentals are, very simple. But I think if you really want to learn about leadership the right way, that's an amazing book. And one that's close to my heart, that's more personal, is When Breath Becomes Air. It's about, a neurosurgeon who has, is battling stage 4 cancer. And unfortunately, he couldn't finish the book, but it's kind of his autobiography and kind of looking out on life. And sometimes you get too caught up in all these different things, and in business, and just trying to be competitive with yourself and achieving these life goals. Like, just take a step back, because sometimes like the things that you're looking for are right in front of you. And that's one of the books that I read when I need that kind of recorrection and course correct in my life.
Those are all excellent book recommendations. I've only read Range of the three of them, but I've heard of the other two, and I will add them to my reading list. But to the point of Range, I think it's something that is super important. I think a lot of in life, parents and universities have a tendency to give a lot of encouragement for people to specialize, and to really focus on very, very specific kind of career paths, which unfortunately, because of automation and changing economy, if you specialize really intensely on something, there's a chance that that job might not exist, and then you have all this specialized knowledge that isn't really needed anymore. So it's, I think, something super important, and that more people need to like seriously consider generalist kind of career paths. And certainly you're like an epitome of a generalist, Mark.
I'm a very curious person, so I just like jumping around and I like process, so that's probably where I'm gonna like really specialize. Process and leadership is like two things. I just love dealing with people and creating really optimized processes. But yeah, I just jump around. It's just the way my brain works.
And you know what? It also, I think, creates a more interesting life, right? There's so much knowledge. Like I think sometimes I think I fear missing out, or I'll just get overwhelmed because I'll buy a bunch of books or things, and then I won't read them. And I was working out in my basement last night, and I just thought I have this little thin area with yoga, and I have all these books on both sides where and a lot of them I haven't read, and I just keep on seeing it. I'm like, there's so much knowledge, so little time to consume. But that's the brilliance of being, I think, a generalist, is you can learn. There's so much, when you think of the amount of knowledge in the world that exists, it's awe-inspiring, and there's so much to learn, and I think that's an exciting thing about being a generalist.
Yeah, it's like my dad's told me from number day one. It's just keep learning, just keep being curious, and you'll be fine. That's it.
Be curious. That is a good thing, I think, to on a billboard or a brand for a company. On that note, where can our listeners go to learn more about you and what you're working on, Mark?
Mostly, like I honestly hate social media, so I don't have anything. But the only thing I do have is LinkedIn. So I will be announcing, different things I've been working on, and different things I'm being a part of on there. So anytime, you just add me on LinkedIn. More than happy to grab a coffee, just like it happened, 5 years ago when I joined Venture for Canada. I was trying to figure out what I wanted to do. But anything new that's coming from me will come off LinkedIn.
Thanks, Mark. It's been a pleasure getting to know you over the last 5 years, and I look forward to keeping in touch. This conversation was super interesting today. We covered a really wide range of topics, from skateboarding to the details of venture capital, to operators, to communities, to international development. On the point of generalist, demonstrates your generalist skill set and knowledge, and it was super interesting conversation. So really appreciate you coming on today.
It's a pleasure, Scott. Thank you.
That's it for this week's episode of A New Wave of Entrepreneurship. Stay connected with us via our social and our email list. Subscribe in your favorite podcast app so that you don't miss our next episode. If you have feedback on today's episode, tweet us at Venture4Canada, that is Venture, the number 4, Canada, or email us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca. We'd love to hear from you. Thanks for listening. I'm Scott Sturr, and until next time, stay safe, stay motivated, and stay grateful. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is produced by Juanita Lee Garcia and Latifa Farah. Editing and mixing also done by Latifa Farah. Erica Ormiston is our editorial assistant. Mark Wallach and Premium Beat own the copyright and publishing rights related to the song used in this podcast. The comments and opinions, recommendations, or suggestions expressed on the podcast by the guests are not liable to Venture for Canada and belong solely to each individual. Any information provided, stated by our guests and our host, is independent of Venture for Canada. A New Wave of Entrepreneurship is a Venture for Canada brand, and all content is owned by Venture for Canada. If you'd like to use our content, please reach out to us at podcast@venture4, that's spelled FOR, Canada.ca.